And welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We're talking with Donald Altman, an expert on mindfulness, especially being a former Buddhist monk. So, by the way, Donald, I'm just curious, since you teach at Portland State University, you calling from Portland?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I live about 30 minutes out of downtown, and I've been here about 15, 16 years now.
Wow. I was just talking to our engineer Rob here and saying how there's so many spiritual teachers in Portland now. I could probably rattle off about 4 or 5 right off the top of my head who all live in or around the Portland area now.
It's interesting. I came here in the late 90s. It was for a book that I'd written called Art of the Inner Meal, The Spiritual Path Through Food. And I had been looking to leave the LA area, and I was just really connected when I got to Portland, and I called, and my wife at the time and we moved up very shortly to Portland. I could feel the spiritual energy up here.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious, because you're a former Buddhist monk, and we talked in the last segment about how you got drawn to it. What got you to decide to stop being a Buddhist monk?
Well, the interesting thing about the Theravadan tradition is that you really are a monk each day that you're there. It's not a lifetime vow, as in some other monastic traditions, and so it's almost like it's every day you make the commitment to be there that day. And I went in with the idea that I would be there for a period of time. I always felt my work was going to be out here. In the world.
Okay.
And there was a beautiful ceremony for leaving the monastery, actually, and taking some vows. And I like to think that I carry the monastery in my heart with me still. And I continued to get teachings from some of the monks after I left, actually.
Wonderful. Yeah, someone actually told me... Actually, someone I had on my show, I think last year or the year before, was saying that, like in Thailand, that it's very common, like after high school, the boys would go and they'd be monks, or they'd be in the monastery basically for like 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months. And then they would leave, and then they would just kind of continue on with their life. And it was just sort of like a part of what everyone did in the local villages, and no one was ever really expected, unless you were really called to it, to kind of stick around like that was going to be what you did the rest of your life, which is very, for us Westerners, we tend to think like, oh, well, if you're making that commitment, it's got to be for your whole life. and actually, there's no rule that says it has to be for your whole life.
Right, and what's so fascinating, it's almost like a rite of passage, I think, in some of those countries.
Right.
And what's also very interesting is I found out that often at the end of life, let's say when a man, and I think women can do this too, but if you feel that you've discharged your responsibilities, your obligations to your family, and they're safe and secure, that some men actually will go into the monastery and end their lives as a monk. So there's also that interesting transition out in that way.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, so once you sort of left the monastery, I mean, you're a practicing psychotherapist, so obviously kind of helping people and working with people is in your DNA. And it sounds like you've authored, I mean, I knew of 2 books that you authored, but it sounds like you've authored many books.
Yeah, I actually have my 16th book is going to be coming out at the end of the year.
16th.
Clearing Emotional Clutter is my newest book. And I have written a lot of books in the mindfulness field, in different areas, mindful eating, mindful living. I wrote a book called Living Kindness, which was actually used at the UN to help different staff. It was used by the UN's meditation teacher, and they actually... had one. I don't know if they still do, but he used that book and taught staff and delegates how to meditate. So, and that book was about spiritual values. So, I've written a lot, and I really feel people are hungry for more information about how to get out of their heads and get really into their life in a meaningful way.
So I got to ask you this now, because I'm sure there's got to be some listeners out there or people on our Facebook live stream who are thinking, wait, he said just get out of your heads, but it's all about mindfulness. Isn't mindfulness in the head?
Well, one aspect of mindfulness is about, you're right, it's about knowing what's in the head, but it's not about attaching or grabbing on or identifying to it. So there's an awareness. I call it constructively distancing from emotional reactivity. And one way to think about it, Sam, is to, and I like to ask people, I travel and I do workshops and trainings and around the country, is I ask people, have you counted the number of thoughts you've had this morning so far? And everybody laughs, right?
Yeah.
And we know that the average person has between 25 to 125 thoughts per second.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard something like
that's about
20,000 a day.
75,000 thoughts in the course of a day. And how many of those thoughts tell you something really profound about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, versus, how many of those thoughts are like self-deprecating and putting yourself down, Yeah.
Self-deprecating, toxic, old habitual conditioned thoughts and so on. So helping recognize and start to have the light bulb go off where people can start to, oh, wait, that's not me, it's just a thought. And that can be very illuminating. And how do we get to that deeper awareness, deeper consciousness, is more spacious awareness?
So I'm curious, from your perspective, what is mindfulness?
Well, I describe it in traditional mindfulness has four foundations, but I kind of describe it in a different way to American audiences, Western audiences, and I've developed and I've deepened my understanding of it over the years. So I've developed more of a what I call it's called Pair Up, PAIRUP, an acronym to describe what mindfulness is, and it's the P is present moment participation.
Okay.
Like that little ticket on the back if you're at a carnival or something that says you must be present to win. Right. So we need to really engage in life. You need to participate in this moment. There's attuned acceptance meaning that there are things that are going to happen out of your control, but you can decide how you want to the attitude you want to take in the face of those things. And so that's the acceptance. And also attuning means attuning with others. Intentionality is, choiceful awareness is just how do we make choices on the basis of, is this beneficial? Is this of service both to myself and to others? So it has a morality aspect to mindfulness, and that is one of the four foundations a lot of people don't often think about. Because if you're just being more present, more mindful, you could use that to be, I could become a better criminal. I won't get caught robbing that bank. I'll be more mindful of, of everything. So it needs that ethical grounding. Right. The R is for reflection, the ability to look within and notice our thoughts and start to notice the inner workings of the mind. Understanding of suffering. The U means that we can be compassionate with others. We start to understand our own suffering, and then we can start to know that, well, this other person, even this difficult person in my life, and everybody has at least one, right? That this difficult person in my life, they have suffered, and we actually share. We have more in common. We all age. We all have experienced loss and grief and so forth. So if we can understand suffering, we can also become more compassionate. And then purposeful partnership is for the P, and that means how can we support one another? And just like today, I hope I'm supporting your show and you're supporting my work. And so what we can do is we can come together and look at how we can help one another. And so it's not just about mindfulness, it's not just about being in the head. It is about being aware of your thoughts and being aware of what's happening in the body, but it's also this, you mentioned in the beginning of your show, co-creating this reality, co-creating, and how we can do that together in a meaningful way. So that's how some people just define it as it's an open, non-judging awareness of this moment. But I get into it a lot more deeply. And I describe all those 6 steps in the book. And the Clearing Clutter book is based on those 6 key ingredients of mindfulness.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's now you mentioned it, let's talk about it. Why did you decide to write a book about emotional clutter?
Well, I think maybe it's a little bit part of my evolution, but I see this as a really transformative book and a way to really awaken our consciousness, because and I think clutter is a great way to describe it, because we can all see the physical clutter, and it's very evident.
Right.
But mental clutter is often invisible to us. We don't even know it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's shocking when you think about it, how unaware we are of all the mental clutter, of ancestral clutter, or and maybe family clutter that we're carrying with us. Like, let me just share a little story about a woman I worked with, and when she came in to see me as a psychotherapist, she'd come in with depression, and during the initial session, she kept returning to this one story where she kept saying, my mother, she abused me, she mistreated me. And I was trying to be very empathetic toward her, but she kept returning to that story. And at one point, I had to interrupt her and say, I notice you keep telling that story a number of times, and it's obviously important to you. And we'll get to that more as we work together, but have you tried to count the number of times, I'm curious, have you tried to count the number of times you tell yourself that story in the course of a day? She paused, and she looked at me, and then she said, wow, she said, John, I have tried to count how many times I tell that story, but I always lose track. And then she said, but I notice when I don't tell that story, I found that I'm a lot happier.
There you go.
So there was some awareness, some vague awareness of the impact of this old clutter story from her childhood, and yet she was, it was like imagine a car that's spinning its tires in a rut. She couldn't get out of it, and so the Clearing Clutter book is what gives us traction. And can help us get out of those ruts and get more into the present moment, and also look at our strengths and look at what we have within us that we can draw upon.
Right.
And so part of the some of the tools that I have people work with is to start noticing the strengths, which we might not notice the clutter, but we also don't notice often the wonderful strengths that we have.
Wonderful.
To help us get through the day. And sometimes we either devalue those, or we just think, that's just my routine. We don't really give ourselves credit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Don, it's time for us to take another quick break, and it'll be real short, just a minute. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about sort of these internal and external manifestations of emotional clutter, okay?
Great.
Wonderful. So everybody, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, and we'll be right back.